The flashlight beam cuts through absolute darkness, illuminating limestone walls that have witnessed 1,000 years of Welsh coal extraction. But today, Sergeant Dai Williams isn't looking for coal seams. He's studying German engineering blueprints by underground lamplight, tracing defensive positions that military experts have declared impregnable, calculating load-bearing stresses that fortress designers never intended anyone to understand from below ground level. His calloused fingers, blackened by decades of coal dust, move across architectural drawings with the confidence of someone who has spent his entire adult life reading the language that stone and earth speak when humans try to impose their will on geological reality. Above his head, 40 feet of French soil separate his mining tunnel from the concrete bunker that has withstood 6 months of Allied bombardment without significant damage. The German defensive position controls a strategic river crossing, its interlocking fields of fire making advance impossible, its reinforced construction deflecting artillery shells like raindrops off slate roof. 3 previous assaults have failed with casualties that make commanders reluctant to authorize fourth attempts, leaving military planners searching for alternatives to direct assault against positions that seem designed specifically to demonstrate the futility of conventional military solutions. But Dai sees something different in those architectural drawings. Not an impregnable fortress, but a mining operation gone wrong. Not perfect engineering, but structural vulnerabilities disguised as strengths. The Germans have built their bunker according to surface military logic, emphasizing protection from bombardment and small arms fire, creating thick walls and deep foundations that can absorb tremendous punishment from conventional weapons. What they haven't considered is subsurface structural integrity, the geological principles that determine whether massive concrete structures remain standing or collapse into carefully excavated voids that eliminate their load-bearing support with the precision that only underground expertise can provide. He traces ventilation systems on the blueprints, identifying air intake channels that represent fatal weaknesses rather than essential life support, calculating excavation angles that would redirect structural stresses in ways that German engineers never anticipated, because they designed their fortress to resist attack from above, rather than displacement from below. Dai understands something that military engineering schools don't teach, that every building is only as strong as the ground beneath it, that the most massive structure becomes worthless when its foundation disappears, that 40 years of Welsh coal mining has taught him to read geological weaknesses that surface-trained engineers cannot recognize even when those weaknesses are clearly marked on their own architectural plans. This is June 1944. The liberation of Western Europe has begun with the kind of systematic thoroughness that transforms political objectives into military campaigns, strategic goals into tactical problems, grand strategy into the mundane but deadly serious business of removing German defensive positions one bunker at a time. The Atlantic Wall stretches from Norway to Spain, a chain of fortified positions designed to make Allied invasion so expensive in blood and equipment that democratic populations will demand negotiated settlement rather than continue paying the price that total victory requires. The bunker that Dai studies from below represents typical German defensive engineering. Concrete walls 8 feet thick, steel-reinforced foundations extending 20 feet into bedrock. Ventilation systems designed to maintain air quality during extended siege conditions. Ammunition storage calculated to sustain defensive fire for weeks without resupply. It controls high ground overlooking river approaches that advancing Allied forces must cross to maintain momentum toward strategic objectives that cannot be bypassed or ignored, creating the kind of tactical bottleneck that allows small defensive forces to inflict disproportionate casualties on much larger attacking units. Previous attempts to neutralize the position have followed conventional military doctrine: artillery bombardment that expended thousands of shells without creating significant structural damage, infantry assaults that achieved temporary success at costs that made permanent occupation impossible, armor attacks that demonstrated the effectiveness of German anti-tank defenses and the vulnerability of expensive equipment to prepared defensive positions. Each failure has reinforced military consensus that the bunker represents the kind of problem that requires either massive resource expenditure or creative alternatives to direct assault, methods that have proven inadequate against properly constructed defensive engineering. But Dai's approach comes from different professional experience, different understanding of how structures interact with geological foundations, different calculation of what constitutes vulnerability versus strength when analyzing engineering problems from subsurface perspective. Coal mining has taught him that rock formations follow predictable stress patterns, that removing support material causes predictable structural failures, that the most massive buildings collapse reliably when their foundations are eliminated through careful excavation that redirects weight-bearing loads beyond structural tolerances that even reinforced concrete cannot exceed. The ventilation system that German engineers designed to keep their garrison alive during siege conditions becomes, in Dai's analysis, a roadmap for structural demolition that requires no explosives, no direct assault, no conventional military action whatsoever. The air intake channels that provide essential life support also create subsurface access routes that mining expertise can exploit to reach load-bearing foundations that surface bombardment cannot damage, creating opportunities for precision excavation that will eliminate structural support with surgical accuracy rather than brute force application. The plan that emerges from Dai's underground reconnaissance violates every principle of conventional siege warfare while remaining entirely consistent with mining engineering that has been perfected through centuries of Welsh coal extraction. Instead of attacking the bunker's strengths, its massive walls, reinforced construction, defensive capabilities, his approach targets its hidden weakness, dependence on geological foundations that mining techniques can eliminate through careful subsurface excavation that redirects structural stresses beyond engineering tolerances. The excavation begins 40 yards from the bunker's perimeter, far enough from German defensive positions to avoid detection, close enough to the target structure to allow precision tunneling that will intersect foundation supports at angles calculated to maximize structural disruption when load-bearing materials are removed. Dai works with a team of Royal Engineers who have been hastily trained in basic mining techniques, teaching military personnel how to read geological formations, how to calculate excavation angles, how to remove subsurface material without creating premature structural failures that would alert defenders to underground activity. The tunneling proceeds with the methodical patience that underground work requires, advancing through limestone and clay formations that provide natural structural support for excavation activities while remaining soft enough for hand tools and small charges that won't create surface vibrations detectable by German listening posts. Each day's work brings the tunnel closer to bunker foundations. Each night's planning session refines calculations about structural stress patterns, excavation timing, the precise sequence of support removal that will cause maximum structural failure with minimum warning to defensive personnel who might escape or call for reinforcement. The geological survey that Dai conducts as tunneling progresses reveals foundation construction that confirms his initial assessment of German engineering vulnerabilities. The bunker's massive concrete base extends deep into bedrock, creating impressive resistance to surface bombardment, but also concentrating enormous structural weight on relatively small foundation footprint that becomes catastrophically unstable when subsurface support is eliminated through selective excavation. The very massiveness that makes the structure impregnable from above makes it vulnerable to foundation displacement that redirects its weight into geological voids that cannot provide adequate support. 3 weeks of careful excavation brings Dai's tunnel to the critical intersection point, where bunker foundations meet bedrock formations that provide essential structural support. The underground chamber that his team creates beneath the German position allows access to load-bearing elements that surface engineers never intended to be vulnerable. Concrete and steel reinforcement that was designed to resist downward pressure from artillery, bombardment, but cannot accommodate lateral displacement. When foundation materials are removed through precision mining techniques, the ventilation shafts that provide air circulation for German garrison personnel create additional opportunities for structural manipulation that mining expertise can exploit more effectively than conventional demolition methods. Dai's analysis reveals that these seemingly minor architectural features actually represent major structural weaknesses, creating cavities within massive, concrete construction that can be enlarged through careful excavation to eliminate load-bearing capacity without alerting defenders to underground activity that threatens their position's fundamental stability. The timing calculations that determine when foundation supports should be removed require the kind of precision that coal mining has taught through decades of experience with controlled structural failures. Planned collapses that extract maximum coal while maintaining tunnel safety. Excavation sequences that eliminate geological support in carefully planned stages that prevent premature cave-ins or uncontrolled structural failures. Dai applies these techniques to military demolition, creating timetables for support removal that will cause German bunker collapse at moments calculated to maximize tactical advantage for Allied operations. But the technical challenge involves more than simple excavation. The bunker's concrete foundation must be undermined in sequence that creates progressive structural failure rather than immediate collapse, allowing sufficient time for underground personnel to reach safety while ensuring that defensive position becomes unusable before German engineers can implement countermeasures. The psychological pressure on Dai's team increases as excavation approaches completion, as the weight of 40 feet of earth and concrete above their heads serves as constant reminder of consequences if their calculations prove incorrect or their timing fails to achieve intended results. The breakthrough comes on a Tuesday morning when Dai's careful excavation reaches the main foundation beam that supports the bunker's eastern wall, the structural element that carries most of the building's weight and provides essential resistance to lateral stresses that would otherwise cause catastrophic failure. The concrete and steel reinforcement that seemed impossibly massive when viewed from surface perspective proves surprisingly vulnerable when accessed from below, demonstrating that German engineers designed their fortress to resist attack from directions they understood while remaining oblivious to threats that mining expertise could deliver from geological angles they never considered. The final excavation phase requires removing foundation support with precision timing that allows underground team to reach safety before structural collapse eliminates escape routes, while ensuring that bunker failure occurs rapidly enough to prevent German defensive response or evacuation that would reduce tactical benefits of innovative demolition approach. Dai's experience with controlled mine collapses provides essential knowledge for managing these competing requirements. Understanding how geological failures propagate through different rock formations, calculating evacuation timing that balances safety considerations against operational effectiveness. The collapse begins with subtle settling sounds that German garrison personnel initially dismiss as normal structural adjustment, the kind of minor noise that massive concrete buildings generate under thermal stress or foundation settlement. But Dai's careful foundation removal has created geological conditions that transform these minor adjustments into progressive structural failure that rapidly escalates beyond any possibility of engineering countermeasures or defensive response, demonstrating how mining expertise can exploit architectural vulnerabilities that surface-trained engineers never anticipated or prepared for. The bunker's eastern wall fails first, its massive concrete construction proving unable to maintain structural integrity when foundation support disappears through precision excavation that redirects building weight into geological voids, incapable of providing adequate load-bearing capacity. The western wall follows within minutes, its steel reinforcement and 8-foot thickness becoming irrelevant when subsurface support elimination creates stress, patterns that exceed engineering tolerances, by factors that make catastrophic failure inevitable regardless of construction quality or defensive design philosophy. The ventilation system that German engineers designed to maintain garrison survival during siege conditions becomes the mechanism for final structural destruction. When foundation failure redirects building stresses through air circulation channels, transforming life support infrastructure into conduits for progressive collapse that eliminates defensive capability more completely than conventional bombardment could achieve with unlimited ammunition expenditure. What had been engineering strength becomes fatal weakness when approached from geological perspective that surface military training never considered. The German garrison evacuates through emergency procedures that had been planned for artillery bombardment rather than foundation failure, discovering that their defensive position has become death trap rather than protective fortress, that their carefully constructed fields of fire now provide no tactical advantage because their firing positions no longer exist in usable form. The evacuation succeeds because Dai's timing calculations included humanitarian considerations, ensuring that structural collapse occurred slowly enough for personnel escape, while rapidly enough for tactical objectives to be achieved. The Allied advance that follows encounters no resistance from positions that had previously required massive resource expenditure and significant casualties to approach, demonstrating how mining expertise applied to military problems can achieve strategic objectives through innovative approaches that conventional military training never develops or considers. The river crossing that had been impossible under German defensive fire becomes routine tactical movement when defensive positions cease to exist as functional military obstacles. The after-action reports that document Dai's bunker demolition technique become classified material that influences military engineering doctrine for siege warfare, creating formal procedures for geological assessment of defensive positions, training programs that teach military personnel to recognize subsurface vulnerabilities in fortified structures, tactical manuals that incorporate mining expertise into conventional assault planning for situations where traditional approaches prove inadequate or excessively costly. But more importantly, the success demonstrates that specialized civilian knowledge often provides solutions to military problems that professional military training cannot address. That innovation emerges from intersection of different expertise areas rather than advancement within single professional disciplines. That survival and tactical success sometimes require willingness to approach familiar problems from entirely unfamiliar perspectives that challenge conventional wisdom about what constitutes relevant knowledge for military applications. Engineering teams begin studying Dai's foundation removal techniques for application to other defensive positions, discovering that many German fortifications share similar subsurface vulnerabilities that mining expertise can exploit more effectively than conventional demolition methods. The geological principles that enabled bunker collapse without artillery bombardment prove applicable to broader range of tactical situations where fortified positions must be neutralized through approaches that minimize resource expenditure and casualty rates. The war ends 11 months later. Dai returns to Welsh coal mines carrying military knowledge that proves valuable in civilian mining operations, where the precision excavation techniques he developed for bunker demolition improve safety and efficiency in commercial coal extraction, demonstrating how military innovation often generates beneficial applications that extend far beyond original tactical requirements. His wartime experience with controlled structural failures influences post-war mining safety procedures, creating protocols that prevent accidental collapses while maintaining extraction efficiency. Years later, when civil engineers design foundations for buildings that must resist seismic activity, they study wartime reports of geological failures caused by precision excavation, including Dai's bunker demolition that demonstrated how seemingly massive structures become vulnerable when foundation support is eliminated through techniques that surface engineering education rarely addresses. The principles he applied under combat conditions, understanding geological stress patterns, calculating structural failure sequences, timing excavation activities to achieve specific collapse characteristics, become formal elements of earthquake engineering and controlled demolition procedures. The French countryside, where Dai's tunnel once undermined German defensive positions, shows no permanent evidence of the underground warfare that occurred there. The moment when coal mining expertise transformed military engineering approaches and demonstrated that civilian knowledge often provides solutions to problems that professional military training cannot address. But sometimes, when construction crews excavate foundations for new buildings, they discover remnants of wartime tunnels that remind them how innovation emerges from intersection of different expertise areas, how survival sometimes requires approaches that conventional training never develops. The limestone walls that witnessed Dai's analysis of German architectural vulnerabilities have returned to their natural darkness. But the lessons learned in those underground spaces continue influencing how engineers approach problems that seem impossible. When viewed from a single professional perspective but become manageable when different knowledge systems are integrated into innovative solutions. The flashlight beam that illuminated enemy blueprints by underground lamplight revealed principles about structural vulnerability that remain applicable whenever massive obstacles must be overcome through precision rather than brute force. Underground expertise proved superior to surface military training when tactical objectives required approaches that conventional doctrine could not provide, demonstrating that specialized knowledge often exists in civilian populations that military institutions overlook or undervalue, that innovation requires willingness to consider solutions from sources that formal training suggests are irrelevant to immediate problems requiring urgent resolution. If stories like this remind you that expertise often exists in unexpected places, that innovation emerges when different knowledge systems intersect creatively, then perhaps there are other moments when civilian skills provided military solutions, when specialized knowledge proved more valuable than formal training, when thinking differently about familiar problems created breakthrough approaches that conventional wisdom considered impossible or impractical but proved devastatingly effective.